Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. One of the men who found the murdered drug barons told last night how he thought they were having a nap, until he saw blood running from their mouths. Bricklayer Ken Jiggins and farmer Peter Theobald came across the massacre at 8 AM on a lonely country track blanketed with snow. The victim's metallic blue Range Rover was blocking the path of their Land Rover, so Ken climbed out and tapped on its window to ask the occupants to move. But there was no response. Ken, 44, said, "They looked so peaceful. We thought they were asleep, but they were dead." He added, "When I looked inside, I saw the driver slumped to one side with blood running from his nose and mouth, and his eyes closed. The passenger was sitting bolt upright with blood all over his face and chest. I knew right away they were dead and that they'd been shot. It was a sight that will live with me for the rest of my days." I ran back to tell Peter and got my mobile phone to call the police as Peter went to look inside their car. As I was speaking, he ran up to me and said, "There's a third one in the back." We were surprised and shocked. It's not something you expect to find on the way to work in the morning. Ken and Peter, who runs the 130-acre White House farm close to the death scene near Rettendon, Essex, were on their way to feed pheasants when they found the Range Rover. It was parked in front of a padlocked gate leading to a fishing lake rented out to anglers by the farmer. Okay, so just cut in here as this is quite a small point, but certainly a very relevant one. Now, a big part of this case is the information that Darren Nichols is aware of. This, by all accounts, somehow gives a lot more credibility to his version of events for being the getaway driver on the evening of December the 6th, 1995. Now, the reason I say that is because this is due to the conversations that he supposedly has with Michael Steele after these murders have been committed. This includes Michael Steele at some point in time saying to Darren Nichols, "Well, I was quite shocked when we drove down there in the Range Rover and I was in the back. We got up to the gate and the gate was locked." Now, some people will say, clearly Darren Nichols had this conversation with Michael Steele. How could Darren Nichols have known that that gate was ever locked? Well, here we are on December the 8th. These are the very first newspaper articles to come out regarding this murder. And already we're having mention here about the padlocked gate. Everything that Darren Nichols mentions, from the padlocked gate, the gate being locked, to the rear window being smashed, all of these little minute details were actually out there in the public domain. Anyway, let's continue from where we left off. Peter, 47, said, "They all looked so peaceful inside the Range Rover. There was no sign of a struggle at all. I would have thought that they would have had some warning of what was to come, so I cannot understand why they're all sat there as if they were asleep. Neither Ken nor Peter saw any footprints leading away from the vehicle in the snow. The farmer who breeds turkeys called the remote track a well-known spot for the local criminal fraternity. 6 years ago, a hijacked cigarette lorry was taken there, its driver was tied up, while 2 raiders made off with the truck's contents worth tens of thousands of pounds. Several safes have been taken to the track to be smashed open. Stolen cars have also been taken to the lane and set alight. But it is also used as a lover's lane by courting couples. Police set up an instant room at White House Farm. Detective Chief Superintendent Ivan Dibley, who is leading the inquiry, said, "As far as murder is concerned, it doesn't come much more serious than this." He confirmed that one of the Range Rover's rear passenger windows was shattered in the shotgun attack. Forensic experts spent the whole of yesterday combing the track and surrounding undergrowth for clues. A helicopter scanned nearby fields. Okay, so I'll just cut in again here as this is another important point which needs to be made. Do remember, this is December the 8th. This is just one day after the bodies were discovered, and already in newspaper articles, we have learnt that this is a lover's lane, a place where courting couples would go to get their freak on, or whatever you want to call it. But this is a lover's lane, a place where courting couples go. Now, interestingly, Darren Nichols would tell the police, I had this conversation with Steele. He said he used to take his girlfriends down there when he was younger. It's a lover's lane. Yeah, it's a lover's lane. Now, interesting term there, lover's lane. It's not, to me, it's certainly not a common term that I've ever heard of, but it appears in this newspaper article and later appears in Darren Nichols' police interviews. It's almost as if he's read this article and then sort of constructed this story between him and Michael Steele, where Steele has said to him, back in the day, used to take my girlfriends down this lane, yeah. But did that ever happen? Did that conversation between Steele and Nichols ever take place? Also interesting to note here, the first mention of the rear window being smashed. This would later be used by Darren Nichols in part of his story again, as in Mick saying to Jack, did you smash the rear back window? Jack saying, no, I never missed from that distance. It must have been Tate. He must have smashed it with his arm in panic. These little details have been taken from articles such as this, reconstructed, reconstrued, whatever you want to call it, and made into another story which involves Michael Steele and Jack Wombs. That's my own personal opinion. Let's continue from where we left off. At 2:30 p.m, the Range Rover, registration number F424NPE, was covered with a tarpaulin and loaded onto a police lorry with the body still inside. Scientists and detectives were keen to examine the vehicle and its contents exactly as it was found. Later, the corpses were due to be taken to Broomfield Hospital in Chelmsford for post-mortem examinations by a Home Office pathologist. Right, let's just cut in here very briefly. Now, interesting turn of phrase there, that they wanted to recover the vehicle onto the low loader in order to preserve the scene, to make sure that that they could examine it exactly as it was found. But this was a disaster from the very beginning. Now, I've spoken to an ex-police officer, someone who's actually high up in the Met. I won't say his name, but he's very much involved in this case currently. Now, his opinion is that as soon as they put the tarpaulin over the vehicle, as soon as they touch the vehicle, they have contaminated that crime scene. Not only that, but that once they put it onto the low loader, the bodies then moved in transit, and once they got it back to the police pound, they had to reposition the bodies before they took the crime scene photographs. It is a very interesting aspect of this case why no photographs actually exist of the inside of the vehicle as that vehicle was discovered on December the 7th, 1995. Now, this has led to a whole host of confusion since these murders took place. We have people thinking that Craig Rolfe's left foot is on the brake pedal, he's braking with his left foot, why are his hands like that? Look, the blood runs down on the steering wheel differently. People can see when they look at the crime scene photographs that something isn't quite right here. And I've explained the reason for that as I've looked into the summing up in court document, which gives us a kind of full picture as to how this crime was investigated early on. And it's in that document where it states that the bodies had to be repositioned due to moving in transit. Now, on one hand, you have the lead detective saying that they didn't want to touch the bodies, they didn't want to get a time of death, they didn't want to touch the vehicle at all whilst it was there because they would contaminate it. Yet they went and contaminated the entire scene themselves by taking the vehicle away on a low loader with a tarpaulin over the top. Now, to me, that doesn't make any logical sense. Whether you're a member of law enforcement or just a regular member of the public, to me, that doesn't make any logical sense at all. The whole idea for taking this vehicle away on the low loader with the tarpaulin over the top was to preserve the scene, preserve evidence, make sure that this vehicle was not contaminated in any way. But as I've said, just the putting of the tarpaulin on top of the Range Rover and the taking away, the removal of that Range Rover is contamination of the crime scene. It does make you wonder why there are no photographs, even just from, the outside, looking into the vehicle, looking down into the footwell, photographing the hands of these individuals. But these photographs are left until, as I say, the Range Rover returns to the police pound on the back of the low loader. Anyway, let's continue from where I left off. The dead men had not been tied up or restrained, and they were not even wearing their seatbelts when they were found in casual working clothes. Blood and debris caused by the blast was confined to the inside of the Range Rover. Mr. Dibley said, "Whoever has killed these 3 people is clearly a very dangerous man. We would appeal to anyone with any information to come forward as soon as possible. People living near the track were stunned by the massacre. They heard nothing and most only learned of the killings through radio and TV reports." Doreen Wiseman, 68, whose cottage overlooks the lane, said, "It's shocking that this has happened on my doorstep, and I didn't hear a sound." Neighbour Margaret Lane said, "It's isolated here, and we're very frightened by this. I shall be making sure I have my dogs close by me tonight." Ron Foe, who lives at nearby Rettendon Hall, said few locals would have raised an eyebrow, even if they had heard the blast. He added, "We're all into guns around here. We are shooting people." It would not be that unusual to hear guns at night, because lots of people go hunting rabbits and foxes. The ownership of the Range Rover was shrouded in mystery last night. It was sold by an Essex garage just 2 weeks ago. But the boss of the showroom at Eastern Garage Group near Stamford Le Hope said, "I can't tell you who he sold it to. I understand 2 men are in custody, and it could turn out to be awkward if I say any more." Last night, police indicated there had been 2 arrests, but that neither of the people in custody was suspected of carrying out the massacre. The garage chief refused to identify himself or say how much the Range Rover was sold for. Its previous owner was pet shop boss Graham Herson of Stamford Le Hope. He said last night, "I sold it in a part exchange deal to the garage, and it stood on the forecourt for a couple of weeks before being sold. I don't know who the new owner is, but it sends a shiver down my spine when I think about what has happened." The next newspaper article comes from the 9th of December 1995 with the headline, "Murder of Mr. Muscles." Drugs gang execution victim Pat Tate was exactly what he looked. A ruthless, gun-toting underworld enforcer. An armed robber and drug dealer, Burly Tate was built like a heavyweight boxer, as shown by our exclusive pictures of him in a prison cell. His life revolved around the 3 Bs, bodybuilding, blonde lover and blaggings. But his imposing physical appearance and fearless reputation were not enough to save him and 2 other members of his drugs gang. Craig Rolfe and Tony Tucker, a former bodyguard to boxer Nigel Benn, were shot dead with him in a Range Rover on a farm track near Rettendon, Essex. Police believe their execution is part of a drugs war. The 3 dead men are thought to have crossed gangland families known as the Untouchables, who have formed a national mafia-style alliance to control Britain's £3 billion drug trade. Tate, 37, seen in our pictures wearing his favourite bodybuilding vest and enjoying a mug of hooch with pals in Swaleside Prison on the Isle of Sheppey, Kent, made enemies behind bars for sucking up to prison officers. One ex-con pal said, "He just worked his ticket, never got into any trouble and was friendly with the screws." The hardcore cons hated him, but at Swaleside, Pat never really had any problems. The dead men are thought to have taken on the 12 key families behind the drugs trade and lost. The family's empire stretches from the Channel ports to Glasgow and dwarfs the operations of the Cray and Richardson gangs of the 1960s. In London, Liverpool, Newcastle and Glasgow, factions have bought up hotels, pubs and clubs to act as outlets for their drugs. They have secured control over the supply in a string of smaller cities. Interpol in London said the criminal network has set up bases overseas, with properties in Spain, Holland and the Canary Islands. They are masterminding drug shipments and strengthening links with the Colombian cocaine cartels and Turkish heroin syndicates. Rolfe, Tucker and Tate met at the Orsick Cock pub near Tilbury, Essex in the car park hours before they were murdered. They were discussing their move into big-time drug dealing. Their execution had been ordered by a drugs baron who already controls the southeast Essex turf. The trio may have believed they were on their way to buy part of the drugs hall, which are dropped regularly by light aircrafts in fields around Brentwood, Essex. A pub regular said, "I saw them meet up and watched them drive off shortly after 7 p.m. on Wednesday." Whoever was waiting for them may well have had a tip-off from the pub. All these drug dealers carry mobile phones to do their business. I had heard they were trying to start their own drug trade with profits made from an earlier drop. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley, leading the hunt for the killers, believes a drugs war has broken out. He said, quote, "These men were moving into the drugs field. They were involved in all sorts of drugs. They are more than just street dealers, and it may be that other dealers are trying to maintain a higher power. Because of that, there could be more violence." Okay, now I have to say, when I first started reading that article, it just seemed ridiculous. But then when I got a little bit into this article, and conveniently it mentions that they were on their way to potentially have a share in some sort of hall which was being flown over, then I'm thinking to myself, hang on, this newspaper article was, let me just check, the 9th of December, so 2 days after they discovered the bodies. And they're discussing there that they may well have been on their way to buy part of a drugs hall, which are usually dropped regularly by light aircraft in fields around Brentwood, Essex. Now, what's going on here? Is this... Now just put yourself in Darren Nichols' position here for one moment. If he is indeed lying about his version of events, he's potentially read some of these newspaper articles back when this happened. He then decides to concoct this story that they were going there for a deal that evening. Something was either being flown in or something was being dropped. There was some sort of big deal going on. It's obvious, all of this stuff is in the public domain. And I'm wondering to myself, how can we have this on December the 9th? The fact that the trio could have been on their way to potentially, rob a light aircraft. Now, also interestingly, it mentions there, let me just read this part again to you so you know exactly what I'm saying. In this article, it states the following. The trio may have believed that they were on their way to buy part of the drugs hall, which are dropped regularly by light aircraft in fields around Brentwood, Essex. Now, in Donna Jagger's statement, doesn't it mention something about Brentwood, or is that in Blogs 19? I can't remember, but somewhere in someone's statement, it mentions that the light aircraft, the plane that was flying in with the cocaine, was going to land in Brentwood or somewhere near there. It's interesting that shows up in this article. So is there some truth in this article? Were Tucker, Tate and Rolfe alive at around 7 p.m, sitting in that pub? I've already talked to you about Essex police redacting some of the calls to Tate's mobile around that time period. I know this article is a little bit far-fetched in places, but there's also some really interesting pointers and some interesting parts to it. I just find that absolutely bizarre. Just 2 days after discovering the bodies, and there's mention there of light aircrafts flying over, dropping stuff, the trio on their way to, possibly meet this light aircraft or rob a light aircraft. Just bizarre. 2 days after the discovery of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, and this appears in a newspaper article. The trio may have believed they were on their way to buy part of the drugs hall, which are dropped regularly by light aircraft in fields around Brentwood, Essex. A pub regular said, "I saw them meet up and watched them drive off shortly after 7 p.m. on Wednesday." Very, very interesting. If you would like to learn more about the Range Rover murders, then click on the video in front of you now. You will also see the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. Many thanks for joining me for this video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.